to start with this afternoon, where the founding fathers were. So the things I'm going to share with you are not my opinion, but rather my discovery of what the founding fathers, who found themselves in perilous times several hundred years ago, and I found within their struggles the solution to our problems. How do we change the course of the current present times? You know, I think it was Einstein that said it best. Doing the same thing over and over again is the very definition of insanity. And so, despite many years of good service that many of the people involved in politics in the state, you know, there's an old saying, politics is practiced by the majority that participate. And so, unfortunately, with a lot of inactivity, there has been a lot of changes to our form of government that do not reflect the founding documents. So I'd like to start with two places. Number one, Article 98 of our state constitution was very important, and let me quote it. By the way, Karen Testerman has printed these wonderful copies of the original 1784 and the current website as it reads on the state website now, and as well as some the U.S. Constitution incorporated as well. Article 98 was the breadcrumbs. They wanted everything recorded for the following reasons. Here we go. To the end that there be no failure of justice or danger to the state by the alterations and amendments made to the Constitution, the General Court is hereby fully authorized and directed to fix the time when the alterations and amendments shall take effect. That, ladies and gentlemen, was my roadmap, because everything is time-stamped. So going retroactively backwards, I was able to see where every single change done to our Constitution has happened. I was profoundly impressed with the last article in the Bill of Rights. We have 39 today, but back in the day there was 38. And so the last sentence, I'm going to cover the entire thing, and I think it goes to the heart of our problems. Called social, is there better lighting here? Another light? All right, do my best here. Social virtues inculcated. A frequent recurrence to the fundamental principles of the Constitution and the constant adherence to justice, moderation, temperance, industry, frugality, and all social virtues are indispensably necessary to preserve the blessings of liberty and good government. The people might therefore have a particular regard to these principles, and in the choice of their officers and representatives. They have a right to require of their lawgivers, I'll say it again, they have a right to require of their lawgivers and magistrates an exact and constant observance of them in the formation and execution of the laws for the necessary for a good administration of government. Ladies and gentlemen, would you hire someone and not oversee their work? What do we do at our elections? Would you hire someone and give them your checkbook and not oversee their work? Back to those who participate in politics and those who don't, right? How many of your neighbors in the current crisis have said, what can we do? What can we do? They're all frustrated. Why? Because they've been depending on those who do participate and then complaining about the outcome. But unfortunately, the enemy is far more determined to the outcome they've achieved. And if we don't realize that and change how we function within the conservative platform specifically, you know, I've been a conservative Republican my entire life. I will never vote blue. That will never happen. But what we have now is a lot of conflict within our party. So how do we go forward? I say we rediscover the fundamental principles of why we associate in the first place, because that's what's missing. You know, when we look at the conflict that I don't want to get into it to fuel the conflict, because everyone here knows what I'm talking about, is that when the party platform doesn't even adhere to that which it states, we have a problem. And so with that specifically is voter integrity, voter fraud, and I'm not referring to the Trump election, I'm referring to the items that I've been fighting in this state for 2 years, which is the changes to our voting laws. For example, who is aware in this state that It was Chris Sununu and the Republicans. Sherman Packard and Dick Hinch sponsored House Bill 1264 in 2018. What did that do? It gave resident aliens, college kids, the right to vote in our state. That wasn't the Democrats that did that. That was the current status quo. What's up with that? And here, how do you like this? Do you realize that we now allow our legislature to change our voting laws? In other words, the employee, those people we've endowed with a trust, a public trust, the employee now gets to decide how it elects itself. No, it's absurd. And so from there, we had the next fiasco this summer. So we have the end of the Wyndham audit now, right? The opinions are out there. I don't want to fuel that. That's not the point. The point is this. Here's what was legal. Bill Gardner and I have become very friendly. He actually invited me. He called me about a month ago, asked me to join him with the Attorney General's office to convince them to do a multi-state federal lawsuit against H.R. 1. If reading the writing on the wall, being scared that being run by the Democrats, they're going to get away with H.R. 1. So he wanted to join the multi-state suit. And I said to Bill, Bill, there's no such thing as a federal election. And he looked at me funny. I said, Bill, they're all state elections. There is no provision in the U.S. Constitution for the right to vote. Who knew that? Well, you don't count. Anyone here have a clue where in the U.S. Constitution your right to vote emanates from? Doesn't. Exactly. Article 1, Section 2 says the people of the several states shall select their delegates. In other words, the people of the states shall select their employees. It only makes sense, right? And so we have the same thing going on at the state level now, is that the state legislature, so 6 months before the last two elections, Sununu has signed into law changes to our voting laws. So the absentee provisions, let's talk about absentee balloting and what is legal in the state. Absentee voting has, according to Mr. Gardner, has a normal 4% turnout. And the provisions in the state constitution are clear. You can exercise an absentee vote if you are already registered to vote and you know you'll be out of town. It's normal process. It leads the last 3 election cycles. 2020, 2018, 2016, 4% was the average mail-in consequence. The last one, of course, is physical disability. Same thing. You're registered to vote and you make arrangements because you can't attend in person because of a physical disability. House Bill 1266, under the cover of COVID, expanded it to exemptions, religious exemption. If your boss wouldn't let you off work, if your babysitter wasn't going to be there for your kid, we took the absentee voting, made it legal, and had a turnout of 30.4. You want to know where the swing vote was in? There. Because it was unconstitutional for the election to be conducted that way. And if you want to know how we sent a blue ticket up and a red ticket down, just my opinion, the Republicans didn't flip the state on their own. They rode the Trump train. The momentum nationwide pushed the Republican Party over the line, but we didn't flip the state red and vote a blue up ticket. Dr. Strang was spot on when he put the data together. He said, that's physically impossible, that can't happen. But it did. And I would suggest to you that since the audit in Wyndham didn't turn out the totality of massive fraud, there's discrepancies that need to be addressed, but where's that number change? It still didn't change the blue votes on the up ticket. I would submit to this audience that it was exactly what was already legal. Here's another one. Out-of-state voters, how do they get here and how do they vote if you only refer to them as a U.S. citizen? Any clues? In 1973, let me begin over again, start over. 1783, New Hampshire adopted its constitution, and the voting laws required, it was written for state citizens. Only citizens of the state could vote in New Hampshire elections. Makes sense, right? All the way to 1973. And it defined a state citizen as someone native born, someone born in New Hampshire. So I have children born here, many of you do, so many of you were born here as well. The second clause was naturalization. In other words, a citizen of the United States, born or naturalized in any one of the 49 other states that moves to New Hampshire, is supposed to reside here to meet the residency requirement to become a citizen, not to vote. The whole resident game has been a game because, I hate to pick on lawyers, but I'm going to for a minute. In 1972, an attorney moved to one of the communities in Tennessee. I forget exactly the specific location, I just know the case law. And basically, he argued that the state of Tennessee was discriminating against him under the 14th Amendment because a new resident who had just moved there should not be treated differently than an old resident who was born there. Get the play on the words, right? The word reside, residence, and resident only mean one thing in law, that you live somewhere. Doesn't convey anything like the word inhabitant. Inhabitant in New Hampshire defines those people in 20 specific places, those who have political rights, the right to elect or be elected to office, not a resident. Our state constitution is very clear on this. The word resident only appears in one place in the state constitution. It's not in the Bill of Rights. It's in direct opposition to eligible voters, inhabitants. And what does it mean? It means, because of Article 4, Section 2, for those of you who know the Privileges and Immunities Clause, it says that citizens of each state are entitled to the same privileges and immunities of citizens of the several states, which means any citizen of the United States of America can move to any state they wish. They can immigrate from one state to the next. Now, we don't talk about that way, but I'll prove my point. Federal law defines the word naturalization as the act of conferring the nationality of a state upon any person after birth, not that of U.S. citizenship. I'll say it again, the act of conferring the nationality of a state. So, people who move here are entitled, who are citizens of the United States, but they're not New Hampshire citizens, have to be treated the same in our courts of law. Equal protection under our laws are extended to them as well. Then under the commerce elements, trade and commerce, they're protected to do business. If you were born in Massachusetts, you live across the border, you want to run a sugar shack or do whatever kind of commerce you want in New Hampshire must treat you the same way. You can't be taxed in a different manner. That is the end of your rights as a resident. If you are a resident, that means that you're an alien to the state. You are not a citizen of the state. I know it sounds crazy, but guess what? That was the law for 193 years, from 1783 to 1973. They removed the descriptive language that said that you had to be born here or naturalized to the state. And when they removed that language, that excluded all Americans that were not born here or naturalized here. That's how we stopped cross-border voting. Does that make sense now? That's how you stop cross-border voting, because initially the residency requirement was 2 years. The original naturalization process for moving from state to state was the same as the federal law governing immigration. Now, I know the subject well because I'm Canadian born, was born in Sherbrooke. So I went through the entire process. So I had to discover what my rights, privileges, and immunities were as an immigrant. Were they any different than someone native born? So when I had to put this puzzle together to figure this out, that's how I was able to decipher a lot of these issues about immigration, and more importantly, why it directly affects voting. So the last and the most complicated, it shouldn't be the most complicated, but it is. The state no longer operates as a sovereign entity. The state was defined by its written constitution, and it's written as required by the Government Printing Office Style Manual as a uppercase capital S state. State is capitalized, new is capitalized, Hampshire is capitalized. In 1842, New Hampshire received a set of standard weights and measures from the U.S. government. Who knows the Commerce Clause? Anyone here know the Commerce Clause? No? Wes, you the other one?
Vaguely.
All right. The Commerce Clause is the powers delegated to the federal government to regulate international commerce. And so, what's that? Exactly, between the Indian tribes, between the states, and between foreign countries. So it receives those standard weights and measures in 1842 from the Secretary of State of the United States, issued by the federal Congress. Sorry. And so it made complete sense. And so New Hampshire drafted the statute that's on the books today. And you want to write this down, 21:4. 21:4 says that whenever a state, like state of mind in a lowercase s, is used in law, in our statutes, our regulations, our immigration policy, our voting, or any of our laws, when it's used in that uppercase, lowercase, they have two different definitions. One is the sovereign state, the other one is the territory, possession, or property of the United States government. I can prove this by federal case law. There's an important case that revolves around the federal government, no surprise, trying to force minimum wage laws on the sovereign states. And so the case went all the way to the Supreme Court, and it proved exactly what I'm saying, is that when a state is created or converted through the Commerce Clause into a franchise of the federal government, you're what? Subject to the rules, directions, and controls. Article 4, Section 3 establishes that power for the federal government. It does. Who writes the laws to control Washington, D.C., Puerto Rico, Guam, and all the territories? Federal government. What do you think happens to New Hampshire? Let me give you a great example as to how that happens all the time, been happening a long time. What they do is, pick on Obamacare. What they do, the federal government creates a mandate. They say, we need to help you. What did Ronald Reagan say? The 9 most dangerous words in the English dictionary were, hi, I'm from the government, I'm here to help, right? So same thing, it creates a dependency through the Commerce Clause. So it says, you have healthcare problems, so we're gonna solve your problems. We're gonna start a program, and we're going to fund it in the beginning, which is a lie, because they do what? Just run the printing presses, called inflation, hello? But they bribe us with our own money. So from there, it starts a program. It goes around the obligation of the state constitution to get the consent of the voters to have Obamacare. They just went right around the state constitution, and then they withdraw the financial support, leave the citizens of the state dependent on new social programs that were achieved by the circumventing of the state constitution. And it's been going on for a long time. So there's nothing new, but that's really the foundation as to how our changes to our government in the state have happened. So let's tie that to voting. 3 things. I said a lot, but I'm going to close out with these 3 points. They've changed an inhabitant to a resident. So you have to consent to being a resident, not the legal definition inhabitant. They change your citizenship status from being a citizen of the state to a U.S. citizen. Why? Because now you are a resident who's a U.S. citizen in federal jurisdiction, federal territory. And so that's why we're subject to all these federal laws and federal controls. So, good news, solution. 2 years ago, I filed a remonstrance with the state legislature. I asked a gentleman here earlier, but I'll go right ahead and explain it. A remonstrance is a written protest. It is the exact opposite of a petition. James Madison and Patrick Henry established the first precedent on this one. Patrick Henry proposed a petition with the Virginia legislature to tax the citizens of Virginia, to promote the teaching of Christian principles. Sounded like a good idea, right? So the petition is turned into a bill. The bill is produced in the legislature, is read aloud twice, and is headed for a 3rd and final reading until James Madison objects. And he does so by a remonstrance, famously called a memorial and remonstrance. And it's a written declaration of opposition, a stern protest, and he argued the fundamental principle, that which the state finances, it controls. Do we want the state anywhere near the church? And of course the answer is no. The second part of his argument was, which version of Christianity do you propose we teach? So for those reasons, the bill was defeated and it went nowhere. And it began the case law for separation of church and state. It's never been, the opinions written there have never been overturned. Now, what I've done here in New Hampshire is that there have been 51 filed. And so the last record I have of one is 1825. And That was the last time someone protested by remonstrance with the legislature. So I come along 150 years later, shock the legislature and say no, because those of you who know Dan Etzsa, many in here maybe, you do, anyone else? A lot of the conservative Republicans about 10 years ago had reinstated the redress of grievance process. It had two fatal failures. First of all, they only provided the remedy for the petition but not the remonstrance, because the state constitution provides either or. A remedy can be, if you want them to repeal a law, you file a remonstrance. If you want them to make a law, you would file a petition. So the committee, a singular committee was created rather than establishing what the founders used to do. Each committee would hear the grievances. So if it was an election law complaint, or it was a court complaint, or any other entity in the state, and you wish the legislature to pass a bill to resolve an issue, you'd go down that process. And with the remonstrance process, it was to stop it. And so that's exactly what I did. I filed a remonstrance on May 20th, 2019, outlining these things I shared with you this afternoon as far as the changes to our voting laws, those three pieces. And guess what the Democrats did? They concealed it. They hid it from the entire legislative body while they tried to pass more liberal voting laws. Remember I said the legislature has now gotten in the habit that it now feels that it's okay for it to change the voting qualifications established by you, the people. Only the people can amend the state constitution. Only you can decide how you want your employees elected. No one else can. And our legislative body, regardless of political party, is drunk with power, and they refuse to capitulate at all. A month ago, I took them to state court. It's a great hearing. I took them all to school. It was 3 lawyers against me. It wasn't a fair fight. I kicked their butts. But you know why? It was really simple. It's not that I'm smarter than them. It's that I took the time to educate myself about the state constitution. And I say the same to all of you. That's what this is all about. I'm a dog trainer. I'm not a lawyer. I didn't want to practice law, but I got dragged into this because I found myself, like the rest of you, frustrated. What are we going to do to take back our state? And as I began, I started studying our own history and educating myself, and I started an organization called New Hampshire Committees of Safety. It's strictly a concept, and the concept at this point is to replicate what the founding fathers did, and I love the story. In 1775, they ran the governor out of the state. They put a cannon in front of his house and said, "Screw." So that's how they got rid of Governor Wentworth. So that began, part of the revolution. And so what did they do? I simply followed their footsteps and said they elected a committee of safety. So the political class assembled because now the colonial government had collapsed. So that political class of people assembled that created a committee of safety as a temporary executive, which today we know as the Executive Council, because after this is all constructed and it's the people who played a major role in the framing of a constitution, that's how the executive committee. So a committee of safety was 5 elected people created by an assembly of the people. At this point, it's strictly a concept. It's predicated on doing 3 things. 1, teaching the state constitution so that people can learn, like my good friend Holly says all the time, if you don't know what your rights are, you don't have any.
That's right.
How many people know how many rights are there in the state constitution? More than 3/4 of the room fails that test, I bet. How many? Throw some numbers out. No. Right. You don't have any now because you don't know what they are, but go ahead.
18.
No. Keep going. 8 in the Bill of Rights. 10 we call the Bill of Rights. 38. 38. The Part 1 form of government was created specifically to enumerate your considerable rights, far beyond that of the Bill of Rights. Here's another stumper for you. Do you realize the U.S. Bill of Rights does not apply to you? Why? That's absurd. I went to school, right? Everyone here's been to school. It's not what they taught you in school, right? Bill of Rights, U.S. Constitution, rah, rah, rah. No, doesn't apply to you. Here's why. each of the 13 colonies when they were presented the U.S. Constitution, half of them responded with a lengthy list of reasons that these were conditional terms to signing on to the Constitution. Those are what we call the Bill of Rights, and they were written as a negative on the federal government. See, those rights and privileges are already enumerated in your state constitution, not in the federal. The state is a positive right. The federal is a prohibition on the federal government that it will never go there in the places where it's gone. And it only operates because we as a society have failed in maintaining a sufficient level of knowledge in our state. And so it's on us. It's on us to awaken, educate ourselves. And the last two parts of the Committee of Safety concept was to start dispatching people to do what you're doing here. In other words, to let these local committees start being the oversight. Remember earlier I said, would you hire someone and not oversee their work? What do you think you do when you vote for them? You vouched for them. And yet you think that you can just elect them and let them run amok? Now they've turned into narcissistic sociopaths that are out of control. Why? Because they're convinced. Why are your taxpayer dollars being used right now to defeat me in court in order to protect your rights? Think about that. That's how out of control our state government is. So we need to wake up. Thank you very much for inviting me, and if you have any questions, I'd be glad to answer them.
I have a question.
What's the one?
About, I don't know, 14 years ago, somewhere along in there, you know, after they took my lung out from Agent Orange cancer, and I was cured, I'm still kicking, but something came into my head and said, hey, you know, you're cured for a reason. It just didn't happen. There's something else in the books for you to do. So I decided to run for state representative. First time I ran, I lost. Second time I ran, I lost. But then I got 6 years in the House. And before I ran the first time, I made it a point to read the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the state of New Hampshire several times over, so that I knew what I was doing when and if I ever got down there. And I came to believe that Article 8 of the New Hampshire Constitution, for a state representative or anybody who runs for election in the state of New Hampshire, Article 8 is the most important article in the Constitution of the state of New Hampshire for anybody who runs for office. And I'd like you to give a little information on your thoughts on Article 8.
Excellent point. Article 8, I was just covering this with someone earlier today. It's a trust indenture. And if you read Article 12, it covers the trust indenture. As a matter of fact, I'm going to read you both of them. Thank you. Article 8 says, all power residing originally in and being derived from the people. All the magistrates and officers of government are their substitutes and agents, and at all times accountable to them. Now, Vermont wrote their constitution in 1777, and it went further. It calls your public employees trustees, servants, that are accountable to you under penalties of law. That's profoundly important. It's been lost, and they've been getting away with running amok for a long time. Now, let me, anyone take this to any lawyer and tell me that this is not a trust indenture. Every member of the community has a right to be protected by it in the enjoyment of his life, liberty, and property, semicolon. What is that? It's an offer to protect, isn't it? Basic contract law, offer, acceptance, and consideration. So let's walk through it. Every member, who's that? Everyone, man, woman, or child, any color, skin color, don't matter. Every member of the community is entitled to be protected by it. What is it? It's the state constitution. Because remember, when this is written, U.S. Constitution doesn't exist. To continue, he is therefore bound to contribute his share in the expense of such protection. I'd call that consideration, right? You're paying a fee. So now you're into a contract. Contribute his share in protection, and to yield his personal service when necessary or an equivalent. That comes into 4 categories, not just militia. Militia, grand jury, petit jury, and the ballot box. Those are your duties. Those are your obligations. So you're supposed to financially support your state. The legislature, by the way, will establish those taxes, and it goes on to say that in further, but thank you again, my little assistant here. Hang on. And the best part, and most of these articles, by the way, if you guys take the time to read this, most of these articles are just like the First Amendment at the federal level. There are 5 elements in the First Amendment, right? The freedom of speech, religion, freedom of the press, freedom of assembly, freedom of redress of grievances. So most of these are no different. So here's the second part, the most important part in my estimation. Personal service when necessary or an equivalent. But no part of a man's property shall be taken from him or applied to public uses. Shared this with Wes earlier. James Madison spoke of this in great detail. Your rights are also your property. They're not talking about eminent domain within this context in 1784. Will be taken from him or applied to public uses without his own consent. Right? We hear that over and over again. Or that of the representative body of the people. Did that say the representative body of the legislature? No. Representative body of the people. That's you. That's you amending the Constitution. And it goes on to say, and this is to the whole COVID crisis and the mask nonsense, nor are the inhabitants of this state controllable by any other laws than those which they or their representative body, that would be you, have given their consent. Say it again. Nor are the inhabitants of this state controllable by any other laws than those which they or their representative body have given their consent. So that, to speak to his point about authority, and that's why I started with Article 38, where it says you have the right to oversee your lawmakers and your public officials, because that's exactly right. It's an indentured trust. And what binds them to it? Their oath. They accept compensation, and they swear an oath to uphold that trust. And it's time we start holding them accountable. And it doesn't matter who they are, they have an oath. I say to everyone, I don't care what your political beliefs are. In my estimation, the way we unify the state is we revolve around or unite over one principle. If you can get 2/3 of your neighbors, get 2/3 of the state to go along with you, we can change the state any way you like. But until that time, it stays just the way it is. Any other questions?
I'm one of the narcissistic sociopaths.
He's one of the good ones, Dan.
All right.
Yeah.
We'll let you off the hook.
Yeah.
I'm serving my 5th term in the New Hampshire House.
Right.
We do take an oath.
Right.
Some of us take it very seriously.
Yes.
A question, election law. If we do not set election law, I think you were talking about that, and that we are basically electing ourselves. Who should set election law?
People. Through the Constitution.
But we're representatives of the people. We each represent about 3,400 people.
Mm-hmm.
We're the largest, 3rd largest legislature in the English-speaking world.
Mm-hmm.
We are the closest to the people.
Mm-hmm.
They can reach out. I've got calls all the time from constituents
Mm-hmm.
and people around the state. So how do the people set election law if it's not the representatives?
It's called the state constitution, Article 30, inhabitant defined.
Correct, and I went through it this year and last term also with constitutional amendments. It requires a 3/5 vote of the New Hampshire House to get a constitutional amendment passed through the House, and then it goes to the Senate,
Mhm.
and then to the people.
Right.
Right. So it starts with the representatives of the people.
But that's not happening.
Well, it does happen.
Well, here's the problem. First, let me address multiple issues. First issue is the legislature itself can only do those things that it's been tasked to do. It has no authority because Article 7 is what the state sovereignty clause. So the people retain all those powers. It doesn't specifically enumerate and delegate to the legislative body or any other branch of government. Second, inhabitant defined is very clear. And every person qualified as the Constitution provides. What does it say today? Article 11 and Article 30 in the Senate. Article 11 in the Bill of Rights. Let me quote. Establishes, and it's never, even though we've had some changes and an amendment that was not very ethical, but that's another story. I won't go there. Article 11. Used to be 3 lines, now it's almost an entire page. All elections are to be free, and every inhabitant of the state, 18 years of age and upwards, shall have an equal right to vote in any election. That's relatively unchanged in more than 240 years. An inhabitant is defined both historically and through usage and custom as those people endowed with the right to vote. So when the legislature passes House Bill 1264, what they did is they commingled. What happened was they caused themselves a crisis when they took away the definition of a qualified voter as two entities. Only citizens of the state could apply, and those people who were declared qualified by the Constitution. So what the legislature is doing now is it's rewriting that. So the example is 21:6, inhabitant and resident are commingled together by a legislative act, where they are now saying that an inhabitant or a resident who establishes a domicile is entitled to vote. The legislature cannot grant the right to vote to a resident alien by a legislative act. It would require an amendment to the Constitution. So in response to representing your body, thank God that you do the hard work that you do. And on that point, again, it's still constrained that the legislature is not authorized to alter the provisions, the constitutional provisions. Now, can it change the time and place, the manner in which elections are held? Yes. It still has a lot of latitude that it has always historically done from the very first statute that I find in 1808. Did I get all the points? All right. Go ahead, ma'am. You. Go ahead.
All right. When you're talking about resident aliens
Yes.
being allowed to vote, are you talking about residents from out of state or out of
Yes.
country? All right.
Yes. An alien defined by either federal law or previous state statute, because it used to, our current voting chapter of state statutes is chapter 654. It replaced chapter 54 in the 70s. And it used to say 54:7 used to say no alien could vote in the state. Because the previous part of the voting chapter, the voting statute, identified who an alien was. That's anyone who's not a citizen of the state. And what was a citizen of the state? Someone born here or upon meeting the residency requirement. And by the way, this is how we protect ourselves from the federal law. We can't put a residency requirement on voting, but we can put a residency requirement on state citizenship. So in 1973, when that requirement was in place, people had to reside in the state upon moving here and immigrating from another state for 6 months. In state, 30 days. So that's how it changed from the initial timeline of 2 years. By the time 1973 rolled around, it was 6 months of residency before you could become a state citizen, not to vote. Because you go down that road, now you're into all kinds of problems with the federal government. Answer the question. Anyone else? Go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Dan.
Oh, we got one from Wes?
One last one.
Oh, you didn't see him for the post there.
So how do the people hold their representatives accountable?
How do you hold them accountable?
Well,
Through,
at the voting polls.
that's one way. Of course, the redress of grievances, what the Constitution prescribes is the additional element, because the ballot box is one of the two ways.
But if our representatives put themselves in front of that process, so they're the gatekeepers of that process to prevent people from doing it.
Then you're stuck like me having to take them to court,
Okay.
which is sad but true. Right? Right. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Just one statement. Thank you very much, Dan. That was very enlightening. I enjoyed it. I was extremely interested in everything you said. But I got to agree with Mr. Representative Cordelli. Article 8 that I spoke about in the beginning, when I asked the question, states that all power originates with you, the people. All power originates with the people, but it is also derived from the people and given to the magistrates of the court to act in their stead. So the magistrates of the court, representatives, the senators, and everybody else, they have the authority from the Constitution in Article 8 to do what they do, acting in... How can you have a government where 1.3 million people meet to make a decision? It doesn't happen. That's why you have a government. So that's why the Constitution, that part of the Constitution was the most important part to me, because it stated that all power originates with the people and is derived from the people and given to the magistrates of the court to act in their stead. That's why it makes legal everything the House does. Every bill, every law that is passed in the government is legal and in accordance with the Constitution. That's just my opinion. Okay, let's get down
Sir,
to...
can I reply to that?
Pardon?
Can I reply to that?
Huh?
Can I reply to that?
We don't have the time.
All right.
All right.